more of a redistribution. So let me get to the third question about welfare systems. And then this is a question that's asked a lot, and it's I'm sure it'll be discussed by other people. The general idea is that if you have a basic income, you can reduce other types of welfare programs. That's the general thinking. Because it's going to duplicate a lot of existing things that are needs tested, and if you have a universal income, you can eliminate some means tested programs. So, but they need to be looked at one by one. And that's a huge topic of discussion in basic income. So I'll let other people discuss that. Would companies pass these new resource taxes onto the consumer? The answer is they were already paying for these costs. It's basically the question is who's getting the rent? Right now, the companies are getting the rent. If the public gets the rent, that doesn't necessarily increase the resource taxes. In the case where resource taxes go up, yes, that will increase costs to the consumer. And this also relates to so I'll give you another example. One of the ones that we propose is a carbon tax. Now that is definitely a new tax, and it has an environmental impact, which was another question. And increasing the price of carbon-containing products reduces the consumption of fossil fuels. So yes, it increases the cost of fossil fuels, and it reduces their consumption, so it has an environmental impact.
So just quickly, Gary, on that point, a lot of people would say that that's a regressive tax because the burden of the carbon tax would particularly fall on the lowest income individuals. Is that a concern for you, or do you think basic income would help alleviate some of those concerns?
Well, that concern is generally raised when there is no basic income, but if you combine carbon tax, that's why they talk about tax and dividend, things like that. If you combine the collection of carbon taxes with a dividend, you offset the regressive nature of it. In fact, in some cases, it's actually progressive because the benefit of the basic income is greater than the cost to lower income people who aren't big consumers of fossil fuels. So it depends on how that sort of trade-off works out. Let's see. Collective ownership. We have proposed a kind of an environmental trust in addition. And the main thing is you can't take basic income in isolation. You have to look at the entire system. That's why I talked about the commons and privatization, because if you can't just look at it in isolation from everything else. The general problem we're faced with is the privatization of the commons and the privatization of rent. And what we want to do is we want to take that flow of money that's going to private interests and redirect it to the public. And that also solves the ethical question that people have about giving money to people who don't deserve it. Well, if we collectively own these resources, then we're entitled to the rent. So there is no argument about who's deserving or undeserving. It's like the Alaska oil dividend. Nobody says that the people don't own the oil. The oil companies didn't put it in the ground, so you can't argue that point. And that's why I like this approach of charging rent for use of the commons, because it eliminates a lot of the arguments about who deserves it and who doesn't. Okay. Collective ownership. As I say, we proposed a common assets trust, and if you read Capitalism 3.0, by Peter Barnes, you'll get more ideas. Basically, it's not enough to just collect rent. You have to also protect these resources, and if you form a trust, they need to protect the resource as well as collect the rent for use of it. And then ideally some of the collected rent will be used to restore restore and protect the resource in addition to paying people dividends. In fact, that's one of the criticisms of the Alaska Permanent Fund, is that it encourages encourages oil extraction, because it creates a feedback where the more oil they drill, the more money people get. So,
well, Gary, actually, I wanted to ask you, do you think that if it's collectively owned, that it would increase society's willingness to extract resources? Do you think it would increase the political popularity of, for, let's say, extracting mineral resources to increase the dividend fund?
Yes, that's my point. I think that that's a pitfall that has to be addressed, and that's why Alaska, the slogan in Alaska is "Drill, baby, drill." They are natural resource state, and I think you have to have some kind of a environmental trust that's protecting the environment at the same time, because you can have these unintended consequences, and that's a legitimate concern. Let's see. How are rents collected? Does it differ from taxation? Well, there are already things like royalties and severance taxes, and it's really just a matter of definition. It's pretty much collected the same as a tax, but it's called a royalty or rent. But how does the rent you pay to your landlord differ from the bill you get from the government? It's still something you have to pay. So it's just terminology, I think. But there is a legitimate difference, a substantial difference between rent and taxation. Taxation is taking something from you that belongs to you, and whereas when you collect rent for the commons, you're not taking anything from anyone that belongs to them. You're actually collecting rent on public property, and this is a different way of looking at it that's very difficult to get people to understand, because we've come to think that everything belongs to corporations. And you just compare, say, the Norwegian sovereign wealth fund, which is from their oil. They have almost $1 trillion. That's almost $1 million per person for everyone in Norway that was collected in a fund because they collected rent for the use of oil by the oil companies. Now compare that with Australia, which has zero in a sovereign wealth fund from all their fossil fuel resources, and they have substantial amount of coal and natural gas, and they've collected nothing for a sovereign wealth fund. But you can also look, like I say, you can look at Norway. They have 900 billion. The Emirates have billions. Alaska has a $50 billion fund. Because they have collected something on behalf of their population and something for the future. And other countries like Australia have not saved anything for the public or for the future. They've let the oil companies keep all of it with some small amount of taxation. So I hope that puts that into perspective. It's a matter of looking at. We've been convinced by this liberal theory of rent that all the rent belongs to corporations, but it doesn't. It belongs to us. So we have to start collecting it and using it to our own benefit.
So Gary, you have about 1 more minute if you want to make a closing statement.
Well, let's see. There was one more question. Is there a disincentive to production? No, because rent is not a production cost. It's unearned income. That's part of the definition of rent. Okay, but in conclusion, I would just say that we have to look at the entire issue of the privatization of the commons. That includes the privatization of the money system, land, resources, and if we look at it as a whole systems problem, then I think the use of the commons, rent on the commons for the basic income makes the most sense as a way to finance it.
Okay, thank you very much, Gary. Let's give him a round of applause. And we are live streaming, Gary, so you can continue to stay with us.
Okay, great.
Okay, so now we will have another video presentation. First, actually, today we've had generous support from the National Junction University College of Social Sciences, and I want to stress that this would not be possible if it wasn't for National Junction University. So today we want to welcome a professor from the College of Social Sciences to give us the welcome speech today, Pingyin Guan. So we'll have him also introduced in Chinese, just 1 second. He is a professor here at National Junction University. He's also my stats professor. I have my lowest grade in stats, but that's okay.
接下来由政治大学社会科学院教授关老师带来今天的开幕演说。
Let's welcome Dr. Guan.
I think we already have a fantastic opening, so if you bear with me for 15 minutes for this ritual session. I'm Ping Guan. I'm the Associate Dean of College of Social Sciences and responsible for international affairs. And on behalf of the college and Dean Zhang Minxiu, he is really like to be here, but he has to interview over 100 applicants for international for a college program today, so he couldn't be here. But anyway, so I'd like to welcome our distinguished speakers and guests who came from various parts of the world, which I believe include Australia, China, India, Japan, South Korea, Singapore, and Switzerland. Maybe I missed a couple countries, but so bear with me. And of course, all of you, our speakers and participants who